experiences, fear and anxiety, sadness and sorrow, envy and desire, guilt and shame, or simply a longing for a better world. It happens that dealing with challenging emotions is the theme of a movie that I love. Who here has seen the Pixar movie Inside Out? A lot of you, great. Well, if you know this movie, you know that it portrays the emotional battle inside the mind of a 13-year-old named Riley when her family moves from the Midwest, where she was the popular star of the field hockey team, to San Francisco for her father's job. And we're going to see a trailer, and in this trailer, she is not happy. They're at the dinner table, and you see what's going on inside her mind. Anger prompts Riley to lash out at her parents. Fear fights for control. And joy works overtime to keep sadness from taking over the headquarters of Riley's mind. So let's take a look at this Oscar-winning demonstration of the battle being waged right now inside all of us.
So, how was the first day of school?
It was fine, I guess. I don't know.
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Did you guys pick up on that?
Sure did.
Something's wrong.
We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
Carry it all the way!
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
Signal him again.
So, Riley, how was school?
You gotta be kidding me.
For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
School was great, all right?
What was that? I thought you said we were gonna act casual.
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us.
All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down.
No, not the foot.
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
Oh, I'll show you attitude, old man.
No, breathe.
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass.
Take it to DEFCON 2.
DEFCON 2.
I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
You want a piece of this, Pops?
Yeah, well, look.
Prepare the foot.
Keys to safety position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire!
That's it. Go to your room.
The foot is down. The foot is down. Woo!
Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
Come, fly with me, Gacinha.
Oh, never fails to make me laugh. So this movie, created by Pete Docter, who is a Christian, by the way, brilliantly portrays what every major school of psychology has acknowledged, which is the multifaceted, multidimensional, mosaic nature of the human soul. Since Freud, psychologists have had various ideas about how these aspects of the soul relate to one another. In the 1980s, a man named Richard Schwartz observed that his clients spoke of parts of themselves, and he noticed that they relate to one another like members of a family. So he created a type of therapy called internal family systems therapy, or IFS. This method has also been called parts work. So you'll recognize these parts when you have conflicting thoughts and feelings at the same time. And who doesn't do that? For example, we might say, a part of me really likes my friend, Susie Q, but a part of me gets really angry with her. So God made us this way, to have parts. Psychologists have consistently made this observation. But what about the church? Well, St. Augustine, in his book, The Trinity, wrote about the soul remembering, understanding, and having a will all at the same time. So you see, Augustine is saying there are parts of us that remember the past, but a part of us that will something better for ourselves. Teresa of Avila wrote of the many rooms in the interior castle, and St. Ignatius of Loyola wrote about the interior movements of the soul. So we see this theme throughout church history, and it's not bad or wrong to be multifaceted and have various feelings at the same time. Your body was created with different parts, arms and legs, for example, and together they comprise you. And in the same way, you're created with different parts of your soul. Since the moment you were born, these parts have been developing over time. Like children, these parts of you grow and learn. When they're hurt, rejected, or traumatized, they can take on extreme thoughts and feelings, and painful memories can weigh them down. They can even get stuck in the past and not know the things that you, as a spirit-led adult, know. For example, they may not know who Jesus is in the same way that you know him deep down. And then these parts of you can cause you to feel, think, and behave in ways that you wish you wouldn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Essentially, the goal is not to get rid of your soul's parts, which would be impossible anyway, but to help them to heal, grow, and get to know Jesus, and discover their valuable God-given roles. So we see this idea in psychology and church history, but what about the Bible? Is there a scriptural basis for this concept that the soul has parts to it? In fact, this concept is supported in both the Old and the New Testaments. Here are just a handful of the many verses conveying this idea. Consider Romans 7:15, where Paul says, "I do not do what I want to do, but I do what I hate." So there's an I, and there's what we might call a part of Paul doing what the Spirit-led Paul doesn't want him to be doing. I do not do what I want to do, but I do what I hate. My guess is that this didn't just happen to Paul one time or in one way, but that you might say Paul had various parts of him that didn't carry on like the Spirit-led Paul wanted him to do. We see this same idea in Galatians 5:16 in the wonderful Live by the Spirit passage when Paul writes that the sinful nature and the Spirit are in conflict with one another so that, quote, you do not do what you want. So again, he's saying there's a you that wants to do things a certain way, and then there's a you that doesn't do it that way. Likewise, James says that we can be double-minded. In Psalm 86:11, King David prays for an undivided heart, implying that his heart has many parts to it that can either be divided or united. And then there's Psalm 42:5. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Notice how some spirit-led aspects of the psalmist is speaking to some other despairing part of himself. So there's a spirit-led part of himself and a despairing part of himself. And then in Psalm 131, verse 2, he concludes beautifully, "But I have stilled and quieted my soul like a child within me." So again, we see it inferred that there is an adult within the psalmist and a child within. So why does this matter? Why does it help to understand this multifaceted nature of the soul? Well, Dallas Willard in Renovation of the Heart wrote that understanding is the basis of care. He says, whether you are wanting to care for a flower in a garden or to govern a country, it's important to understand the flower or the government in order to be able to care for it and to lead it. So you can't care well for something that you don't understand, Willard is saying. If you want to understand something well, then you have to study it, and so that's what we're doing tonight. There have been many examples over the years of how these parts fit together, and here's one example of how these parts can relate to one another according to internal family systems therapy. According to this map of the soul, we all have managers and firefighters, which you could call protectors, and then we all have exiles, which are the parts that are being protected. Now, is this the only way to think of the soul? I had the same question, and so I asked it of Christian psychiatrist Kurt Thompson, who wrote the book Anatomy of the Soul. I thought he'd be a good person to ask. And he replied, Kim, there's no one right framework for the soul, but what's important is that you have a framework and that you have one that makes you more like Jesus. And I've found that this model does that for me and for my clients. This model is a flourishing, evidence-based model that provides a helpful way of categorizing the distinctive parts within the human soul and suggests a step-by-step approach to leading these parts into their most valuable states. I've written a book called Boundaries for Your Soul that presents an approach that integrates concepts from this IFS model with popular boundaries concepts viewed through a Christian lens, because I believe that ultimately the best way to care for hurting parts of your soul is to invite God's Spirit to lead them. This holistic framework introduces a way to care for your own thoughts and feelings and behaviors. It's biblical and it's simple, and best of all, it works. From your spirit-led self, you can be attuned to the troubling thoughts and emotions within you and give them the care that they need. The spirit-led self in this model is not a part. It is the core of who you are, and its role is to lead the parts of your soul like a symphony conductor so that the parts of your soul can work harmoniously. So the spirit-led self is also portrayed throughout Scripture. The spirit-led self is represented in many ways throughout the Bible. For example, when Jesus says in John, "Abide in me and I will abide in you." Paul says, "You have received this, not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God." He says that you're marked with the Holy Spirit. And he prays that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. So in these many ways, he's pointing out that the Bible is pointing out that we are not God. As Karl Barth said, God is the holy other, but by his grace, God chooses to send his Spirit to dwell in the heart of the believer. There's another really wonderful passage in Acts chapter 2, where the Holy Spirit comes upon the disciples at Pentecost. And what's so interesting to me about that passage is that he decided to do that on Shabbat, which is the day that the Jews celebrated the giving of the law to Moses at Mount Sinai, which was 50 days after the crossing of the Red Sea. And Jesus was coming upon the disciples in the upper room through his Spirit 50 days after his crucifixion on the day that the Jews celebrated this giving of the law. And so he was very, very clearly wanting us to understand that he wanted his Spirit to be his law written on our hearts. What a wonderful gift that we have. So you know that you are being led by the Spirit when you have these 8 C's, when you're curious, you're compassionate, you're feeling courageous and clear and calm and connected, confident and creative. And when you're feeling peaceful, playful, and having perspective. And I threw in those 3 P's for the Presbyterians. So you guys can ignore those 3, because we're in an Episcopal church here. So you can ignore them too, the Methodists, yeah. So now why do all these letters begin with C, do you think? I have no idea either. It just happens to be that way. I tried to come up with some words that begin with the letter Z, but I couldn't think of any. So I just thought the letter C it's nice to remember these words. So when you're wondering, am I being overtaken by a part or am I walking with the Spirit? You can think about these 8 C words and that will give you a hint. Also, if you're exhibiting any of the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5. So let's turn back to this map of the soul. So we have these managers and firefighters that are our protectors, that are working to keep you from experiencing pain. You're probably familiar with the modus operandi of these hard workers. They're front and center in your life. They're consistent, persistent, and accustomed to being in charge. When they have healthy boundaries, life is good. But when a protector has taken you over, you're no longer living from the spirit-led place within. You can say you've lost your sense of perspective. You've had a total eclipse of the heart. Both managers and firefighters work tirelessly, though in different ways, trying to protect you from the overwhelming feelings of your exiles. So let's look at how your manager parts do this first. Manager part activities include worrying, people-pleasing, striving, self-criticizing, other criticizing, controlling, perfecting. And it may be that you're feeling right now like you should be checking your email, or there's something you should be getting to on your to-do list. That's probably a manager part of you. So we like these parts. We appreciate how hard they work for us, because if they didn't exist, we wouldn't get anything done. But the goal is to have healthy boundaries with them. Firefighters are another type of protector part. Rather than trying to prevent pain, as the managers do, firefighter parts kick in after a painful event has occurred. Firefighter activities include overeating, addictions, overspending, self-harming, daydreaming, lashing out. For example, I had a friend who watched Lady Gaga sing Shallow too many times on YouTube recently. A friend of mine, not me, it was a friend. And maybe that was a hardworking firefighter part of her. I'm not sure. And the same behavior, whether it's watching videos on YouTube or perhaps overeating your favorite snack, can be done by either a manager or a firefighter. You can tell what kind of part it is by the role that it's playing. For example, watching a YouTube video or having a glass of wine at night or something like that can be the activity of a manager part trying to prevent pain from surfacing. Or if it's an extreme behavior, such as having many glasses of wine at night or watching a whole lot of videos, that can be a response to an emotion that has already taken place, and so it's probably more extreme. But the way that you really know it is by whether it's trying to keep pain from occurring or kicking in and responding to pain after it's already occurred. Either way, these are protector parts. The third category of parts of the soul is called exiles. Exiles are the vulnerable parts of your soul that you try to push away. Exiles are often stuck in the past where they hold on to painful memories, including feelings of shame and fear and insecurities and hurt and loneliness and sadness. So I actually came by this method honestly. Here's a picture of my family. This was actually just pretty close to here on Bryn Mawr in Highland Park. I was born there. I was born at Baylor Hospital, and I lived in Highland Park when I was growing up. And this is my mother, my father, and my big sister, Catherine. And we lived in a little yellow house with white scallop trim and bright yellow carpet. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I don't know if I would have gone for the yellow carpet, right? But this was the 70s, so, work with me. But it was a very sweet family. But then, because of events that are really unbeknownst to me, my father ended up leaving our family, and he went to Europe when I was only less than a year old. So this is the picture of our family, my Christmas card photo a few years later when my mother had moved to New York City as a single mom with me and my sister. So even at a very young age, a part of me absorbed the impact of that great loss. Apart from summer visits, my dad was mostly absent from my life. He was a fun-loving dad, perpetually entertaining, but emotionally superficial. I don't remember many times that he shared authentically in ways that connected our hearts together. As I grew up, I felt his absence more deeply than I was able to tell him, or maybe even understand myself. I had a hole in my heart the shape of a charming father in a faraway land. When I was 8, my mother remarried a caring psychotherapist. And I had a loving family, but the subtle heartache from my biological father's absence didn't subside. And on top of that, I found that I was now drawn to distant men who reminded me of my father. So my relationships weren't working out so well. Meanwhile, a well-intended part of me was telling me that I must have been the reason why he left. This struggling part thought that the best strategy to address my heartache was to make myself more worthy of love. So for those of you who love the Enneagram, I became a 1 on the Enneagram scale, a perfectionist. So in my early 20s, I was a graduate theology student, and by all appearances, I was breezing through life. Nobody would have guessed that my emotions were threatening to derail me. I had developed, you might say, a low-grade chronic depression. Then one night, I was studying in my apartment, and I had a friend over studying with me named Joanne, who was from New Zealand. And I just stopped studying for a moment, and I said, Joanne, do you feel like you have a knife in your heart all the time? And she said, no. And I said, well, I do. Do you know anything I can do about this pain that I carry around? I was just getting really tired of the feeling. And wise beyond her years, Joanne picked up a throw pillow from the cushion and she handed it to me. And she said, Kim, why don't you hold this little pillow like it's that sad part of you that misses your dad? And that process of getting internal space from this grieving part of me gave me relief for the first time that I could remember. I began to get in touch with the Spirit of God living inside of me, comforting this young part of me, quieting my soul like a child within me. I began to realize that my pain was only one aspect of my soul. It was not the sum total of who I am. Looking back, I realized that she had taught me how to focus on a part that felt abandoned and was carrying the memory of abandonment. I began to learn to get space from this part and even relate to it like a parent would relate to a child. This practice gave me the needed perspective to be able to pray for my sad and sorrowful part and to do something about the grief that it was bearing. I even prayed that this part of me might experience Jesus in the same way that I felt I experienced Jesus when I prayed and went to church. Slowly, this part of me began to trust in Jesus' presence with it and began to heal. It began to feel that he loved this part. He loved me, and I was not abandoned. I am God's beloved child. So this part no longer overtook me. It was settled into one chamber of my heart, and I could begin to receive love from good men, good friends in my life that God had brought into my life. And I ended up meeting my wonderful husband, Ken, who is first and foremost in my life. So the book that I wrote presents this method of seeing your feelings as belonging to parts of your soul. And I've tried to share with you how this method has been so helpful for me in dealing with difficult emotions. You might call it a spiritual discipline. It's a way to pray. Spiritual disciplines do not heal us, but they create a space for us to be present with God so that healing can occur. So this is a therapy method. It's also a spiritual discipline. It's also a way of looking at yourself, a way of talking about your feelings so that you can communicate with other people in your life what you're feeling in a way that doesn't overstate the problem. For example, if you're having a difficulty with your friend or a spouse or a parent, instead of saying, I'm so mad, you can say, I love you, and a part of me is feeling angry right now. And that recognition that it's a part that has that feeling makes a world of a difference in how we get along with one another. This method involves using the imagination to actually come up with images of parts of yourself or give them names. And the imagination is central to the healing of the soul. C.S. Lewis recognized this when he had read George MacDonald's fantasies, and after that he wrote in Surprised by Joy. He said, that night my imagination was, in a certain sense, baptized. The rest of me, not unnaturally, took longer. I love that quote. So he's just talking about how valuable the imagination is and how it can actually be infused and led by the Holy Spirit of God. So why do I call this book Boundaries for Your Soul? Well, again, it's because parts can be too close or they can be too far. So if you have a chronic feeling like I did, that's probably a part that's too close that you need to get some space from so that you can care for it better. If you have a feeling that you haven't dealt with it in a really long time, that could be a part that's too far away, and that you've disowned, and it's important to bring that part closer so you can get to know it and care for it. So just like we have healthy distance with other people, it's important to have healthy distance with the parts of our souls. Was John Townsend okay with me calling this a boundaries book? Some people ask me that. Actually, I suggested to John that he wrote this book. How many of you have read the original Boundaries book by Cloud and Townsend? It's a wonderful book, and the series is terrific. And in the original book, there's chapters on how to have boundaries with your spouse, with your children, with your friends, at work, and there's a chapter on having healthy boundaries with your own thoughts and feelings. And there's spin-offs on all the other chapters, but there's no spin-off on the boundaries with your thoughts and feelings. And so I approached John, because I realized this was an internal boundaries book, and I said, John, why don't you write this spin-off book on this topic? And he said, that's such a great idea, Kim. I will introduce you to my agent and get this book published. I think you should write it, and I'll endorse it. So he did that, and his endorsement is on the cover, and I've been very grateful to have his support along, and Henry Cloud's support along the way. So in addition to this idea of the soul as having these parts in a spirit-led self, there are steps to working with a part once you've identified that there's a part that you want to work with. And I call these the 5 steps of taking a U-turn. So these 5 steps include focusing on a thought or feeling that's troubling you, befriending it, welcoming it, inviting Jesus to draw near, unburdening it, asking what it would like to give up, if it's carrying a memory, for example, and then asking what role it would like to play in your life. I remember once a woman told me that she didn't like to stop and pray because her feelings overwhelmed her so much, and she preferred distracting herself, which made a lot of sense to me. And that's why we have these 5 steps, because they give you a very concrete model of what to do when you're having an emotion that's difficult. It's very counterintuitive to welcome these parts and to spend time with them because we don't like the way that they feel. But ironically, if we ignore them, they dig in their heels and they get stronger. And it's much more helpful to actually make time to be present with our thoughts and feelings and to do this work of soul care. So I'm actually wondering if I could lead us through a guided prayer where you get to experience these 5 steps. What I'll do is I'll ask you to focus, which just gives you a moment to identify any thought or feeling that you would like to work with. Notice how it's showing up for you. It might be a physical sensation, like a tightness in your chest or a pit in your stomach or a headache. It might be a thought or feeling, or it might become an image. Then I'll ask you to befriend it. And the way that I'll do this is to ask you to notice how you feel toward this part. Now, usually there's an inner critic, and then I'll ask the inner critic to step aside. until you have an open heart of curiosity and compassion toward this part. And then I'll ask you to invite Jesus to draw near and be present with this part. And then to see if the part has anything it wants to give up to Jesus and anything to receive from him. And then lastly, we'll ask this part if it wants to try to accomplish its goal in a more helpful way. All parts are well-meaning. The protectors are trying to protect the exiles. That's a noble task, but probably their strategies need to be adjusted a little bit. So we'll just ask the part how it would like to accomplish its goal now after it's understood the power of God. So I'll lead us through this prayer. If you prefer not to participate, feel free just to listen and observe. And then at the end, I'll play a little video, and we'll have some Q&A. So if you would like, just take a moment to close your eyes or focus on something in the room that doesn't distract you. And just do a little scan and notice what you're experiencing right now. What is it that you're most aware of? It might be a physical sensation, or it might be a feeling or a thought. And then consider that this feeling or thought might be coming from a part of you. It might belong to a part of you. Continue to get to know this part of you. See what it wants to share with you. Notice if this part is willing to present itself as an image. And not everyone gets images of their parts, so it's okay if you don't have an image. You can just focus on what it's trying to say to you. Now notice if this part of you is aware that you're present with it. Does it know that you're there? What would it like to say to you? How is it feeling toward you? Maybe it's saying, you don't give me enough time or attention. You're not doing good enough. Notice how you're feeling toward this part of you. It may be that you're feeling critical of this part of you for being so critical of you. So ask that inner critic if it would step aside. Maybe it could step behind a glass wall and just watch you be present with this original part. See if you can develop an open heart toward this part of you that's showing up. See if you can extend it curiosity and compassion. And now you might want to ask this part if it knows Jesus. If so, ask how far away Jesus is. Or if not, ask if it would like to get to know him. Maybe it's mad at Jesus. Would it be willing to tell those things to him? See if Jesus will come any closer to this part of you. And can you envision him there? What is he saying? What is he doing? Now see if there's any burden that this part would like to give over to Jesus. It may be a feeling that the part could put in a bottle, for example, or a box and hand over to him. It may be the film of a movie that's been replaying in this part's mind that you might want to burn or somehow throw away or give to the angels in the sky. What's important is that the part has a chance to unburden. Is the part taking in Jesus' radiant face? What is it like for this part of you to be in the presence of Christ? Now see if there are any resources or gifts that Jesus wants to give to this part of you that's been working so hard. Maybe the part deserves a medal of honor for caring so much for you. Maybe it's time that the part receives a promotion or gets to relax. Now that your spirit-led self is present with Christ. And now see if there's a role that the part wants to play now that it doesn't have to carry this burden any longer and doesn't have to do this hard work of protecting you. Maybe it would like to be a consultant or a cheerleader, or maybe it would just like to rest. So thank God for showing up for you. Thank this part for showing up for you. Let the part know that you're always there for it. And when you're ready, you can come back to the room and open your eyes. And I'm going to play a video by one of my favorite bands here, Mercy Me, singing Dear Younger Me.
Dear younger me, where do I start? If I could tell you everything that I have learned so far, then you could be one step ahead of all the painful memories still running through my head. I wonder how much different things would be, dear younger me. Some speech about how to get the most out of your life. Do I go deep and try to change the choices that you make, 'cause they're the choices that made me. Even though I love this crazy life, sometimes I wish it was a smoother ride, dear younger me, dear younger me. Dear younger me, it's not your fault. You were never meant to carry this beyond the cross. Dear younger me, you are holy, you are righteous, you are one of the redeemed, set apart a brand new heart. Oh, you are free indeed. Every mountain, every valley, of the redeemed, set apart, a brand new heart. Oh, you are free indeed. You are holy, you are righteous, you are one of the redeemed, set apart, a brand new heart. Oh, you are free indeed.
My Aunt June Hunt, who's a biblical counselor here, plays the guitar whenever she speaks. I don't have that gene, so I have to play videos. But I love it, so I think it's all right. So just remember that all parts of you are welcome. Remember to extend curiosity and compassion to every part of your soul. God created every part of you with a purpose. And take time to get to know your protectors and your exiles, and let Jesus lead them and you into the abundant life. In closing, this is really a process of expanding the boundaries of God's kingdom in your heart. When I was getting my master's degree in theology at Regent College in Vancouver under J.I. Packer and Eugene Peterson, I had a wonderful theology professor, a New Testament scholar named Gordon Fee, who was on the NIV committee and a New Testament, just a wonderful teacher who asked our class, what do you think Jesus talked about more than any other topic? What do you guys think? Okay. Money, I hear that. Often people say love. He said, what Jesus talked about more than any other topic is the kingdom of God. And I actually went through the Gospels. I encourage you to do this and just circle every time you see the word kingdom. Guys, it's on every page on average. He cared a lot about the kingdom of God. And so our mission as Christians is to expand the boundaries of God's kingdom on this earth. But then there's a place in the Gospels where the Pharisees say, so Jesus, when and where is this kingdom coming? And he replies, the kingdom of God is within you. So this work is about expanding the boundaries of God's kingdom in your soul. It's important soul work, and I encourage you to continue on the journey with me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kimberly. That was really good.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate one of the things I really appreciated about this talk was how well balanced it was in terms of like very practical counseling, like just giving us tips, like when I was going through the exercise that you were doing, it kind of felt like someone was teaching me how to do really good back stretches, but for my soul,
Yeah.
And a good way to sort of strengthen my soul and make it more dependent upon the Lord. So I really appreciated that. We have a few minutes for a few questions. Gretchen?
May I just ask you what you said your dad was? He was emotionally, I think you said superficial, but I'm not sure.
I'll find my exact words here.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, he was a 7 on the Enneagram. He was very fun-loving. I called him my Disney dad, and I used to go visit him in Greece every summer, actually. But he was emotionally unavailable and superficial, so that might have been what I meant. He could not talk about feelings that were painful. That was very hard for him. So we kind of grew up not having a genuine connection that left me feeling pretty empty. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I haven't read the book yet, but I would like to say I have a wonderful son that is there. My daughter-in-law is about to sign in, and we're learning.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was a comment about she was thankful for the lecture.
This is what I'm thankful for, and that's all I can say is I'm thankful for having that. But I do thank you for sharing this with us too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions, Elizabeth?
Thank you.
Another Elizabeth. Common name.
Kim, thank you. This is just wonderful. It's really rich, just on every level. So I loved how you brought St. Ignatius in, because I was hearing a lot, those Ignatian, about discernment of the spirits within us. And you gestured at how we can know when we're being led by the spirit-led self and kind of getting the parts of our soul in order. Could you talk a little bit more about this method as a tool of discernment kind of outside ourselves, that having the right orientation lets us see where God's calling us to go forward and make good decisions? Does that make sense?
So are you asking, how does this method help with discernment?
Yeah, exactly.
With discernment? Yeah. Okay. Yes. I think all of us would love for God to write on the wall what he wants us to do, and unfortunately he doesn't seem to do that. But it is, I think, true that he gives us a sense of peace when there's a direction that he wants us to pursue. And so what this method does is it helps to differentiate from protector parts that might have voices that are getting in the way of God's voice. And so the way that I work with my parts when I'm doing my own soul work is I'll just map them out on a piece of paper, and I'll recognize, okay, here's a protector part saying, you shouldn't do anything, you should just stay at home. That's clearly not the voice of Jesus, that's a protector part. Here's a firefighter part saying, go watch another YouTube video or whatever, I'm just joking, but that's whatever it is. Maybe exercise, that could be an activity that distracts you from God's calling. Or I might have just a feeling of great grief about something that keeps me from really listening. So when you're able to differentiate from these different parts, and there's always all three, there's one of each category around any situation in your life. So if you don't know one, find it. And then once you've gotten space from those parts, then you can really sit with Jesus and listen to what he's telling you to do. Like for example, today I had been spending some time just working on blending from these different feelings that I was having, and what I got to at the core was Jesus saying, I am with you. I just really heard that over and over again. So I don't know if that really helps with practical decisions in life, but that's I think, what we really need anyway, I think he's always with us. Yeah.
One of the questions that I had, Kim, was at a certain level, so just to come back to my back stretches analogy and similarity. So I don't think that as a general population, we have the skills to figure out when can I just do like back stretches to have a healthy core, and when do I need to go see a chiropractor?
Oh, yeah.
So for example, so this is a good exercise, but do you have any tips on how we can figure out, I don't think this is working, I need to go see a mental health specialist or something like that?
Well, sure. I recommend daily soul care work for everybody. Everybody in psychology would say that. I think Peter Scazzero's book on the Emotionally Healthy Church, John Townsend, regularly say, at least twice a day, stop and check in with your emotions, and invite Jesus to be present. When your emotions are getting in the way of your functioning in your work or your relationships, then it's time to see a professional. But I do regular soul care with a spiritual director on a regular basis and recommend it for everyone. On my website, I have a list of Christian therapists who do internal family systems work because I wanted the church to really have this method available to them. So here's my website, and if you go to I think it's the free page or the counseling page or something, there's a whole list of therapists and spiritual directors, and it says whether they work by distance or not. So I encourage that, and I also encourage you to sign up on my a piece of paper I brought here for my newsletter. If you'd like to stay in touch, I offer workshops and retreats. I do therapy myself. I offer long-distance counseling, and I have a free book here for anybody that would like it as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, so thank you for being here. Let's give another round of applause. And there's a wonderful wine and cheese reception just around the corner as you exit. So please do join us. I think Kimberly will be there as well. We can mingle, enjoy each other's company, and also ask her more questions if you're interested. Thank you all for coming out again today.